not the organizer of these seminars. He's Luis Tirepix. Where is Luis Tirepix?
He went.
He went to do something, but he asked me to do Juan's presentation. So they are, and you are also one of the organizers. So well, thank you for the people that organized this seminar. And I'm super happy that we are returning to live things. And, you know, the more I do Zooms, the more I hate them. So, so this is the first part of the uselessness of my presentation. The second part is to present Juan, which is, of course, completely useless because everybody knows him. So you all know Juan Acevedo. Just wanted to say one or two things. So Juan studied in Venezuela, where he comes from, at the Universidad de Los Andes, and he studied, I think, classical philology, something like this. So originally, you are, Latin and Greek, trained in Latin and Greek, originally. But he also has, very important part in Hebrew and Arabic. And then he did his doctorate in London at the Warburg Institute. And his doctorate is published in a beautiful book that you should read. So you have to say you should read. So about 2 years ago, as you know, Juan now works with the RUTTER team. And about 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, I don't remember anymore, I was hiring people and I wanted to have someone, an expert on Arabic studies, because I was very keen on using the RUTTER possibility. I mean, we are basically trying to cheat the European Research Council, which is, using their money to do whatever it pleases us. One of the things that I wanted, don't mention this, of course. One of the things that I wanted to do was to start a very good Arabic group. So I was looking for a person, and I opened this position, and Juan applied. And his application came with a recommendation letter by Charles Burnett, which some of you know. And the recommendation was very, very, very flattering. But after 2 years, there is one thing I can say about that recommendation letter. It clearly underestimated what Juan has already did here. So I'm very happy. These have been 2 very good years of work with Juan. And, not only Juan did, very good research work in his topic, but he has been extremely influential in putting together a group and, starting other things, and then supervising those 3 days, and helping everybody, and everything that relates to philology, but quite more than that. Okay, so this has been a very good experience. Thank you very much, Juan. About this seminar, the title is What Happens Within the Sky, Celestial Forms in Greek and Arabic. So thank you very much. And in case you don't know, Judith is over there, is the wife of Juan.
Until tradition.
Well, you don't say you're going to be happy with inauguration. There is a very great woman, which is absolutely true in this case. So, thank you very much, Juan.
Thank you. We all know how exaggerated it is.
Thanks, God.
Thank you very much for the invitation to talk in the context of this seminar. I appreciate it because I came here, I think, shortly before the pandemic struck and we had to stop having this. I had the chance to attend to 1 or 2. And I quite like the idea of the seminar, so I'm very happy to present here, and also especially in memory of our dear Elena. And as it happens, today is the anniversary of the passing of a very dear friend of us in the UK, Nurin Shakazemi. So we'll do this also in their different ways. They were both people who spent their lives in a relation with the sky or heaven. So it has something to do with them. When I proposed the title for this talk, I had in mind a certain dissonance in terms, a semantic quirk related to the name of that vault above us. Heaven, sky. Most often we think of this as a case of synonymy. Heaven means sky, sky means heaven, no problem. But there is a crack in this synonym, and I invite you let's enter through the crack and through it approach tonight's subject. This dissonance is most apparent in English, where we use two words with overlapping meanings. Sky always for the meteorological heaven, and heaven for the mythical, theological heaven. But not always, not quite, not entirely. And I remember the famous Spanish poem based precisely on the perception of this semantic problem, which in Spanish, as in many other European languages, manifests as a polysemy. One word containing various meanings. Cielo, museo in português. Cielo means both heaven and sky. And here is the poem. No? Yeah. So let me read it. It reads very nicely. It's a Golden Age Spanish poem. Yo os quiero confesar, don Juan I, que ese blanco y carmín de doña Elvira no tiene de ella más si bien se mira que el haberle costado su dinero. So of course it's a love poem. He's saying, you know, I recognize that this lady is beautiful only because she paid a lot of money. Pero también que me confeséis quiero que es tanta la verdad de su mentira que en vano a competir con ella aspiran belleza igual de rostro verdadero. Which is so beautiful, and here's a nice pun. Verdad is an old word used for beauty, belleza, but it sounds like verdad. Yeah? So the truth of her lie, or the beauty of her lie, is so much that someone who is really naturally beautiful can hardly compete. Más que mucho que yo he perdido antes por un engaño tal, pues que sabemos que nos engaña sin naturaleza. So what's the matter if I'm behind her like crazy? If anyway, nature herself is always deceiving us. And then here's the key. Porque ese cielo azul que todos vemos, ni es cielo, ni es azul. Lástima grande que no sea verdad tanta belleza. So the play is on the meaning of cielo. So that blue sky we see, or that blue heaven we see, neither is it heaven, it's not blue either. What a great pity that this great beauty is not true. Yes. So there is an awareness of there being some semantic problem. Not a problem in a bad sense, but maybe like an enigma or a koan. And there is a feeling of joy at the beauty and an inseparable sadness, an unarticulated wish. Oh, if only it were true too, not just beautiful. But let us see the sky and see what we can make of Argensola, the author Argensola's frustration. Perhaps if he had been looking at the night sky, that might have made a difference. Like the navigators of the medieval Indian Ocean, I will advance following the guidance of the stars, the night skyscape. But it is important that we keep in mind what it is that we mean by the night sky. Certainly not this emasculated sky of the city night. So you can see here, yes, here's Polaris, Ursa Major. This is more or less what we see in a city like this. But something more like this, maybe? Still, same place, but with pictures very difficult. Maybe something, maybe. But still, a photograph doesn't really convey what it is a full starry night sky. Right? So we need to keep this in mind because we live deprived of this experience pretty much for our entire lives. Right? And I think for most people, really, it makes a big difference in how they relate to nature and to cosmos, because the spectacle of a full starry night, you know, well, maybe Van Gogh knew something about it. You see these pictures, it's rocking. Now in this marvel of the night sky, thanks to the motion of the vault, we start recognizing patterns. We start recognizing a center of rotation first. Because of course, if we are looking at in this direction of the North Pole, and we spend just an hour or a bit more. We start seeing how everything is moving, but not this. Right? Everything is, and if we observe more and more, well, it becomes really clear that there is a pole and an axis. Hence, a middle line, which equates the house, an equator, which means an equalizer. So something like this starts taking shape in our minds. Then the sun comes out, and we have cardinal points more clearly. Yeah, so we have the east with the sun coming out. These are screenshots from Stellarium, of course, you don't know. And if we keep observing for some months, a whole set of motion patterns becomes as clear as day, though we never see it. And this is what ends up in the armillary sphere. Some people have this even in their coat of arms of their country, armillary sphere. It is like the summary of this experience of the night sky. Yes. How is it so clear if we don't see it? In Arabic, they call this experience tasawwur, which corresponds to the Latin informatio. Both words are based on the same basic concept, forma, sura in Arabic, forma in Latin. A pattern or shape which through a faculty called aql or ratio in Latin, and it is the Greek logos, very wrongly usually translated as reason, establishes a connection, an analogy. It binds phenomena to our understanding. But let's not get too philosophical just yet, and let's go down to earth, or rather to the ocean. These patterns of movement go hand in hand with the acquisition of combined groups of stars. We call them constellations. And this grouping helps us to make sense of the great many stars that are out there. Then the belt or ribbon of the sky, which is delimited by the path of the sun, the belt we call the zodiac, can be associated with those groups of stars. We can be quite arbitrary and divide the zodiac in 13 or 7 or 30, but since the farthest antiquity, 2 divisions have been in use. One division in 12, associated with the movement of the sun, and one division in 28 associated with the movement of the moon. This is how we speak, so we speak of the Arabs, call them towers, the towers of the sun. And the lunar stopovers, we use mansions directly from Latin Greek. It's a stopover. This is how we speak then of the 12 signs and the 28 mansions of Manasik. They are simply 2 possible divisions of the 360 degrees of the zodiac. And so you see, with all this informatio, the night sky becomes for the observer something quite complex, which may be represented in this way. Yes, so this is one among many such representations. And of course, there's a lot more information here, and we'll come to that. But you can see 12 zodiacal signs, a division in 12, and then there is 28, yes, around. Yeah, I hope we got the right image. And one very interesting fact is that the 28 is the number of letters in the Arabic alphabet. So in Arabic medieval cosmology, there was always a relation between these places in the sky and words and language. Yes. The moon was moving through the alphabet, if you wish. Now, with this image, it is as if we are now far from the direct observation, and of course, the image is very artistic and it's symbolic, and yet at the same time, it is eminently practical. Knowledge of these divisions of the zodiac allowed mariners to determine the best seasons for sailing, which in the regions of the monsoon is a life or death matter. And it is a fact that most books on navigation in the Middle Ages and early modern period, they begin with what? With a description, with a very basic description of this precisely. They say things like the year has 12 months, the sun runs through, and if there are 12 suns, and there are 4 seasons, this kind of thing. So this is a summary of these basic facts, or it could be used for that. The divisions of the zodiac can also be used to determine the passing of time, like a celestial watch. This is very common for the lunar mansions. And so this combined use of the zodiac was, we could say, a vertical usage of the heavenly motions. And then it is as if an intellectual sky has been discerned underlying the material visible sky. Then there was also, for navigation, a complementary horizontal usage of the sky to determine the course, the direction to follow. And this was for the greater part particular to the navigation beyond the Cape of Good Hope, Indian Ocean, Southeast Asian seas, China Sea, and Polynesia. They all work similarly. When faced with the horizons, something similar happens as when we observe the rotation of the sky. We realize there is a full circle around us, to make use of which we need to create divisions. We have the 4 cardinal points, but this division is too large. It's not practical. So we subdivide 8, and then we subdivide again 16, and again 32. Other numbers are possible. Like with the division of the zodiac belt, the number is apparently arbitrary, because the background of the night horizon is not empty, but full of stars and constellations which rise and set. We can quickly establish a correspondence between points of the horizon and risings and settings of stars. And so we end up with a horizon divided in 32 realms, as we call them, corresponding to 15 risings and settings and the 2 polar directions. Here is a typical Arabic depiction of these stellar realms. Yes. So, for instance, here we have a star. It sets on the horizon near the north. It rises here near the north, and it sets here. Think of this. Yes. So something rising here, setting here, and these stars would be used as markers. Yes. The Pleiades are somewhere here. And there's Vega, and so on, and there's Canopus somewhere there. Normally, very bright stars, yes, are used for this.
The rising directions of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The rising direction.
Yes, the rising. Mm-hmm. Rising and setting points. So that's why you have 15 here. Yes, you have the 2 poles and the 15 stars. And that's it. So when you spoke of directions, you would say, head in the direction of the rising of the Pleiades. Mm-hmm. That meant something. And then the oars make your course in the direction of the setting of Vega, that you would know. Actually, there are a few translations of these Arabic works where they simply do away with that and they just say southeast or southwest. So then you see this is a very practical application, of course, of the observation of the sky. But there are some lies here, going back to the theme of lying, or just half-truths in this nicely fitting explanation. And the nautical writers themselves mention this. They say, well, the correspondence between the rising and setting points around the horizon is not quite precise, only approximate, but we need a regular division, so let's not mess with the division. And the correspondence between the 28 perfectly equal sections of the zodiac and the 28 asterisms, the lunar mansions, is also not quite fitting. Some groups are larger, some smaller, some are barely visible. But we retain these constellations in the words of Ahmad ibn Majid, the most famous and probably the most important of the nautical writers in early modern times in Arabia. We retain them for the sake of the name, he says, because they fill a space within the series of the constellations. That is, the phenomenon itself, what we observe, is secondary. What is foremost is the system, the geometrical division of the circle, and the corresponding names. Suddenly it seems as if these very practical mariners might be basing their art on somewhat abstract theories. As if they were trying to do, saving the phenomena, as they used to say, trying to fit their theories at whatever cost, onto the facts. But maybe not. There is more. When Ibn Majid speaks of the purpose of his astronomical descriptions and teachings, he says he does this. Oh, well, this is another, even more practical view of the division of the horizon. Yeah. With the compass, it's clearer for us. And so this is what he says. He says he does this for the discerning pilot to find his way through the expanse and compact of the heavenly spheres, to advance to the ultimate degree, and thus to picture the sciences in his heart, and to comprehend the turning and dimensions of the spheres through the stars as they rise and set. Plenty there, but this curious picturing the sciences in the heart is worth a closer look. The Arabic wording, يُصَوَّرُ الْعُلُومِ فِي قَلْبِهِ, is medieval epistemology in a nutshell. And it may well explain the relation just mentioned between abstract theory and practical observation. This sentence has three components. An object, what is acquired or obtained, al-ulum, the sciences, knowledge, plural of ilm. Second, it has a manner of acquisition or a process, the verb yusawwiru. And this is the same root, sawwara, we have found for the tasawwur, the information to do with the forms. And third, there is a recipient or a container for the knowledge acquired, qalb, the heart, as the center of consciousness, sometimes distinct and sometimes overlapping with aql, the intellect. Tonight we will deal only with the second component, that forming of the knowledge in the heart. I would really like to understand what Ibn Majid is on about, especially because he has been so widely acknowledged for centuries as the teacher and even the patron saint of pilots. It is safe to assume that he is the representative of a centuries-long worldview. He explicitly comes from a lineage of masters. We're not yet sure how far back it goes, maybe 12th century, 11th century, maybe farther back. And he successfully passed on this knowledge to his successors. So he's really a key figure there. So what were they talking about? What was he talking about? Ancient knowledge comes to us like the half-heard strains of an instrument we no longer even know how to tune. And words are very treacherous. We speak as if we have an idea of what they meant. But every honest attempt at understanding is to a certain extent, or has to be, an exercise in unknowing. Let's do this exercise for the second part of the talk. Imagine the pilots sailing by night in the Indian Ocean, year after year, on polluted night skies. A highly complex system of star and asterism combinations, which from every side of the horizon and at every altitude gave indication. What was that sky for them? Was it not internalized? How could all that compounded knowledge not become a sort of intellectual concretion? It must have been a sort of crystallization. The directions of time and space were crystallized in the expert navigators. In fact, the key and our guiding thread is in the root mentioned above, sawara, and the word suwar, forms, shapes. One of the names of God in Arabic is al-musawwir, the giver of forms, or now even the sculpture, the shaper. European theologians call this dator formarum, the giver of forms also. Closer to our destination, the Platonic ideas were also called suwar. Suwar Platonia, Platonist Plato. So very straightforward, the Platonic forms, Platonic shapes. If you think of sculpture, it's very interesting to realize how this concept of Platonic ideas might not just be some things you see out there, but something like three-dimensional, embodied. Now, perhaps when even Majid says what he says, he is not directly referring to these theological or philosophical correspondences. It may be simpler and related to the illustration for this talk, taken from one of the most important treatises in the history of astronomy. As-Sufis, Sufi is the name in this case, As-Sufis Suwar al-Kawakib, the name of the book, the book of the forms of the stars, the shapes of the constellations of the stars. Once again, the same word, Suwar. So perhaps simply what Ibn Majid means is, hey, after navigating for such a long time, you will for sure have those constellations stamped in your mind. So no need for any high-minded speculations, just that. Something like an archive of patterns in the mind like this. Yeah, so we can think, oh yes, the pilot will simply have all these dots connected there. He thinks like a program, an app for recognizing the stars and the constellations. But this impressive chart looks flat, especially if we take into account something very suggestive that a Sufi himself does in his book. And I have been asking people who really know about this stuff, and they can't tell me really where did he get this. This seems to be a stroke of genius of a Sufi or somewhere near his context. So what he did is that he reproduced every constellation twice. So, as you probably recognize, have you recognized the constellation? It has a very easy telling here, because the three, yeah, it's Orion and Jabbar. So for each constellation, he has mirroring each other, and he says, one as seen from inside the sky, and the other as seen on the sphere. All of them are like this in the book. And this is the oldest manuscript in Oxford. Actually, Paravench, it's now having its 1000th anniversary, the production of this book this year. I haven't seen any publicity, but so this thing he does is often interpreted as a mere practical aid for using and creating celestial globes. And yes, why not? But it is surely also in line with a cosmology well known through the Middle Ages and summarized, for example, by the Juan Acevedo, the Brethren of Purity. Yes. The Juan Acevedo were sort of, the people always say mysterious, but I think maybe after decades of study they are no longer so mysterious. It was a group of scholars who mostly worked around Basra around the 10th century, 9th, 10th century. And they produced this huge encyclopedia called simply the Epistles. So people often say the Epistles of the Brethren of Purity, and that's it. It's like, the Epistles is like 57, I think, treatises, and they start, so, and they are very interesting because they are really a middle ground between the Greek tradition and the Islamic developments of the Greek tradition. So more than other thinkers, they really make a synthesis where you have lots of elements of the Greek sciences straight, and you can see, it has been studied, many Hellenistic elements, for instance, so it can be seen that it came organically through the centuries to them, the Greek tradition. And then all that sprinkled with citations from the Quran and other Islamic things. And they were very, very influential and we don't know more about them normally in history of philosophy, only because translations have been slow to come. Partly because they were very eclectic. They took everything. So they start with the epistle about geometry and arithmetic. I think the first one is on number, and then they have epistle on medicine, on linguistics, and then on religion, and then they go astrology and magic. So because of this, I think, early scholarship in Europe, especially in the days when everyone was more or less allergic to anything that looked like superstition, they said, oh no, they are too. But actually they were considered quite scholarly through the Middle Ages in the Arab world, and they influenced many people like that. But in any case, so the Juan Acevedo, by the way, a great edition is being produced slowly in London of the works of the Juan Acevedo, bilingual, proper thing. So highly recommended. If you're, I was telling Ines the other day, when I'm going to check on a topic like that, Middle Ages, having to do with, I go straight to check them as the middle point there. So highly recommended. These people explaining the movements of the planets, and the planets were the element of the celestial movements that was not used by navigators. Yes, they have no use for them really. So, but in cosmology, the planets were of course very important, and following a cosmology inherited from the Greek, they view the expansion above as a compact of concentric spheres, like the diagram we were looking at earlier, each containing the one below, like an onion, each one assigned to a planet. They say actually like an egg, they explain. And this is the image they give. The first point of interest in the rephrasing of this ancient view is that they say each heaven is also an earth for the heaven directly above it. So you have here the earth, water, air, ether. So you have, normally we would have the four elements here in the sky of the moon, Mercury, Venus. So the sky of the moon would be the earth of the sky of Mercury, and so on and so forth. So when a Sufi shows the constellations from both sides of the sphere, he is placing himself also within this kind of structure. Because after all, if you say Al-Qura, as he says, as images, as the stars are seen on the ball, literally, you're placing yourself outside that sphere, right? So by means of his knowledge, he is being able to step out beyond his own heaven and look downward. Look, this is how the constellation looks from here above. And then he puts it in the book. Here the word heaven, following this logic, is now being used as an epistemological level. The questions potentially raised would be, for example, when we use a globe, when we study with a globe, Are we in a heaven above it? Yes, like when he was drawing these pictures. The second point of interest is that in a further development of this cosmology, documented at least from the 13th century, two of the last heavens or skies are assigned, one to the fixed stars and the following one to the forms or patterns of the constellations. And I think here in this one, yes, you have sky of final stars or of stations, sky without stars of zodiacal. I'm sorry, the resolution is not very good. So these are these two, and then there comes attributes of God. Yeah. So here you have, and this is the very interesting thing, the constellations as patterns or recognizable shapes are considered to exist independently of the stars which are assigned to them. It is as if we were back to the distinction made by Ibn Majid, but this time on the highest reaches, between the stars themselves and a recognizable entity which they form, or perhaps that they inhabit or they embody. So what is this relation between the stars and their constellated patterns, being in these two separate spheres? And also, now, thinking again in astronomical terms, when you see the planets moving at different speeds, well, that allows you to think, yes, physically you can think, try to explain, well, they are on different orbits, they are on different distances from the center, but why posit this separation between the patterns of the constellations and the stars? With this question, I approach the end of my talk, and we have reached a point of discourse where the Arabic names of the heavens and the skies become hard to distinguish. The key terms are falak, a sphere, and sama, a heaven. It is as if, unnoticeably, or ever so gradually, the meteorological discourse and the astronomical discourse became epistemological, symbolic, metaphysical. But we should not think that there is anything particularly Arabic or Islamic in this. Centuries earlier, in the most cosmologically influential work received from antiquity, Plato's Timaeus, I have the reference for all this, but I'm not going to bother you with that. And later in his Epinomis, the stars are given a semi-divine or divine-like status. Here's a citation from the Epinomis. And they are key in guiding the minds of humankind towards knowledge. So here, this is a very famous passage where he explains how humanity learned number at its most by observing the stars. So directly related the observation of the night sky with the simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, okay. This brought a lot of, there's a long history of this. Even more remarkably, in Plotinus's Enneads 2:3, dedicated to the question whether the stars have agency or not. So this normally considered, I think, bashing of astrology times, because he starts saying, "Oh no, this is crazy." But he's very nuanced. He's very subtle. So he says it is by their position and configuration that they are related to what happens down on Earth, not because they are actors themselves. It is the position and the configuration which are considered the determining factor of their astrological significance. Not, and yeah, this is what he writes against, he says, not to consider them as if each star were a powerful deity throwing rays of influence, just as living beings that occupy their places in the hierarchy. By studying those positions and configurations, men gain insight. That's Plotinus. And once again, the stars appear to be liminal between ontological levels. In Ptolemy's geography, to give an example from another greatly influential text, we find this, where the study of heaven is considered most beautiful, associated to, broadly speaking, mathematics, and made possible by the direct observation of the revolving sphere. Also important because this is what gives more or less in very few lines the basics of Ptolemy's program in writing the Almagest for the sky and the geography for Earth, and the complementarity and the importance. Yes. Quite similar texts are found also in Nicomachus of Gerasa, Introduction to Arithmetic, a work which was translated by Boethius into Latin and then by Thabit ibn Qurra into Arabic. So this means Boethius, Thabit, these were extremely influential authors. So these had many, many reverberations through the centuries in trickling through the sciences. Later down the centuries in the Arabic tradition, the 13th century Andalusian polymath Ibn Arabi affirms explicitly in his Futuhat that the planetary spheres are at the same time part of the corporeal world and degrees of the subtle world. So what in other authors is just implicit there, here he's very explicit. The planetary spheres, yes, astronomical, you see that, but they are also or somehow blend into the subtle world, the metaphysics. Skies become heaven, or rather heavens and skies interpenetrate and imbricate to compose the cosmos. The resulting texture is so comprehensive that it is reflected from the highest reaches of intellection and contemplation to the very practical activities of everyday crafts. So it is no wonder, for instance, that in the art of wayfinding through the ocean, you will find echoes of this cosmological view. And the same with other crafts and found especially in many decorative, what we call decorative arts, for example, throughout, in this case, Islamic medieval civilization. All these, of course, touches on several classical problems of philosophy, especially in relation to what is called the theory of ideas and epistemology in general. How do we know? In our times, something along these lines has been posited, something along the lines of these theories I have been sketching, has been posited and continues to be explored by a cosmologist, I believe is famous now, Max Tegmark at MIT, especially through something he has called Platonism on steroids. And his hypothesis is called a mathematical universe hypothesis. So it's a very valuable Platonist, if you like Platonism, because he has all the credentials of a great physicist who measures in minute detail distances between stars and the life of supernovas and that kind of thing. And also he, without any hesitation says, no, everything here is mathematical objects. No symbolism, or no, these are mathematical objects, something like that. I'm simplifying, of course. So the sky we see is directly, before our eyes is an intellectual sky, or a heaven, if you want, or a compound of heavens reaching from measurable realities to archetypal forms. So thinking of our initial poem in the light of what I have been discussing, it seems as if that light, the deceit of the sky, pretending to be heaven, is more a case of distance. Argensola, the author, perceives heaven to be altogether different from the sky. But they may just seem distant enough as to feel unrelated, alien. That distance is a thin veil, and in the sky, the visible sky, there is that family air. We look at the sky and we say, with more or less intensity, depending on our individual resonance, wait a minute, I know this. I know what this is about. And according to the philosophers and scientists just mentioned in that long tradition, we do indeed know what it is about. Thank you very much.
So of course we have, time for questions, and I have like 3 to start, but yeah, Shina.
Oh, mine is just very small.
Oh, when she says that.
No, it really assisted. Beautiful, beautiful discussion. I will be thinking about this a long time. The question I had was trivial. It was only about that compass that you showed that we talked about before.
The wind rose.
The one with the peculiar needles where we were talking about the stars. Can you tell me when that was made and in what context? Because it was curious to me that it seems that, no, the other one previous, it seems to have like a fleur-de-lis on it. So I'm like, what's going on?
Yes, that's a curiosity there, and apparently.
Is it like a syncretism?
Yes, well, this is a late thing. This
Okay.
is an early 19th century.
Oh,
This is that manuscript at the BNP, at the British, Biblioteca Nacional. And at some point, they started using fleur-de-lis. So I read about that, and it seems to have become common in Oriental wind roses.
It's quite nice to hear your explanation now and look at it quite different.
And it was quite, it's clear it was from European influence.
Yeah, okay, fair enough, thank you.
There is a curious thing, if anyone knows, I still want to know is, what are these?
We were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. These patterns here. And here at the center is the Kaaba. And it's orientated more or less in how it is in reality.
So my first question has to do with this, so I'll jump in. In the West, my question is if you have the same tradition in the Arabic world. In the West, the division, so this maritime division, completely distinct from the astronomical 360 degrees division, which comes from, this one we know it comes from Babylonia. But this one, originally, it comes from the winds.
Yes.
So you have the winds, and you have remnants. So much before there was any magnetic compass, or it was not even pointed to astronomical things. It was just the winds.
Just the winds.
You have 4 winds, and then you have the 8 winds, and this you can do with winds.
Yes.
And you have remnants of this until very late,
Yes.
because pilots, when they already have compasses and they already have this canonized, they still express themselves using the names of the winds.
Yes. And I think it was 24. I'm very keen to know now.
The number of winds?
Yeah, when the 24 started being replaced by 32.
Okay, 8 was the most common. 8, but you can of course go more and more and
Yes.
more.
Yes, and there is a Greek precedent there. Aristotle in the meteorology speaks of 24 winds.
Okay.
And he also says he sounds a bit like these pilots. He said, well, yeah, they're not quite there on the line, but they are 24. And this is one interesting place about diagrams because he says it's useless to talk about this thing without a diagram.
Yeah.
And so, it's obvious from the text that it was a text with an illustration.
And can I ask one more complex question? Did the form of the graphics representing the scheme applied to Arabic navigation always look like this? What is the earliest extant example with this kind of form? Was it always in this way? Because you could draw it in other ways, of course, right?
Yeah.
You mean like...
Like looking like a central circle and outer circle and
Yes.
triangles.
Well, the problem is we don't have many.
Okay.
We right now actually we just started looking at the manuscript, which is maybe 16th century, that Mahdi manuscript. Yes, and there they have something, but it's not as elaborate graphically. It's not that this really. So maybe when we look a bit more into it, we can tell you. Yes, but I would guess also that this shape like this might have been influenced also by European development.
This is too late. This one.
It's very late.
This one here.
Yes. So we know what is interesting here, and this is why I brought it, is that the distribution of the ROMs is exactly as it had been. We are certain 300, 400 years earlier, it was exactly like that because this is how they speak of the ROMs. But the shapes itself is different.
And my second point is more theological. So we don't have in Latin the distinction heaven sky. We only have Cairo.
There are a few. Yeah, I was looking into this. So
In the second Greek, you have Uranus, but how can you?
Yeah, so the word that has been there, like in and out of the discussion, is firmamentum.
Yeah.
And it appears spectacularly in Genesis.
Yes.
God created firmamentum caeli.
Yeah.
And so firmamentum was like the expansion, that space. Everything was like this, and then let's create this firmamentum, with like a separation. And so this word comes in when you start looking into this kind of text. This is the word that more or less is coming in and out. But you're right. It's a more mono. It's a one term mostly, like as it happens in Spanish. There are a few other words that sometimes come up in the related literature. And for instance, in Arabic also they speak alam. They make use of this. Alam means world. Sorry. So, and this is, I think nowadays it has become common in a certain way to say, oh, the world of the archetypes, the world of, maybe, I don't know if it's a new agey thing.
But that's a little bit different, I think.
It's a little bit different,
because
yes.
you also have cosmos and mundus.
Yes, exactly.
And this is pretty standard.
Yeah.
But the other thing is the diagram that you showed of the several orbs or layers.
This?
No, the other one. More. Yep.
Bilingual one, right?
Yes, this one. Yeah. Now, okay, so in the Western tradition, you have the planets, so the stars, the things, the planets, etc. And then you have a ninth, orb, which is purely mathematical, and even a 10th orb, which is purely mathematical. So one is to provide precession, and the other is to provide trepidation. So they are described as orbs which are invisible. They have no stars. They are there just to provide a certain type of motion.
Oh yes, so they have a justification.
They have only mathematical justification.
Oh yes.
But you need them because
to explain
all the phenomena, all the motions, because to each celestial motion it is associated with an orb.
Yes.
So since you have precession, you need an orb to make the precession. This is the orb number 9. Yeah? But then there is this other thing which is trepidation, and this, or number 10.
So there must have been something like that
I
also.
would suspect,
Yes.
I would try to read that Arabic very carefully.
Yes, exactly.
Because this should be an expression.
Yeah.
Or any
Yeah, like the others
Yeah.
for the planets, and because it's not as if after heaven number 8 it becomes metaphysical.
No.
The whole thing is metaphysical at the same time.
But number 8 is where the fixed stars are.
Yeah.
Fixed stars, and then procession, and then trepidation, and then in the Christian version,
Yeah.
the heavens of the blessed,
Yes,
imperium, etc.
yes.
But,
I think.
yeah.
I also have a question related with the directions of the rising and setting stars.
Yes, I'm really sorry. I have
Actually,
the shamelessness of speaking about these things here in front of you.
No. No. My question is how this nautical tradition, let's say, relates with another instance. Is that in the Islamic world they use this kind of rules to find the direction of Mecca.
Oh yes.
How this relates? How this tradition is?
It was very influential. Yes, yes. So this, in fact,
The nautical tradition comes from this more terrestrial.
they don't. They say they actually pride themselves of there being a direct relation between finding your way through the ocean and finding the Qibla, the direction of prayer. And it's in some of their works it's explicit. They say this is a great knowledge, what I'm going to teach you, because it not only will take you safe to your place of destination, but you will find the Qibla. Well, it is well known how there was always a
So there is
strong relation.
It's also a symbolic meaning in
Yes, very much so, and also that the practical interest in finding the direction of prayer, and also finding the times of the prayers, calculating that they have a strong relation with scientific developments.
And the second question is, of course, in the sea you have a flat horizon, but with the nautical text, that this is not a problem. But if you are in a terrestrial environment and if you have a hill, the rising of, at least for mid northern and southern latitudes, you have the stars and those celestial bodies rising like this. So if you have a hill, for instance, the star is not rising here, but here.
Yes.
My question is if you did find any discussion of these questions in your, maybe not in a nautical text, but in your sources.
Well, we have the good fortune of, we have been working with a scholar who is in Abu Dhabi now, who is a great sailor and an archaeologist, and Eric Staples, and he has been involved in building historical ships, and one of the projects was to build one of these early modern Arab ships, and they sailed it from Oman to Singapore. And so he always has many stories about that, and one of them is, he took on board with him the books of navigators to look for all these combinations of stars, and he said, can you believe one of 20 days, 19 were cloudy? Or something like that. But then, very interestingly, what happens is that when you go through this literature, you realize they are not just giving you, oh yes, 32 or 16 rising points and 16. There's a huge number of alternative combinations of stars that can be used. And when they accumulate, it means that at any given point of the night, you see things, and maybe that side is all cloudy and there's cloudy, but you see one thing there, one there. Oh yeah, where's your Polaris, for instance. That was a critical thing, knowing always where Polaris is. So they have several techniques devised to to be able to know where is Polaris by looking at other combinations of stars. So yes, this is how they dealt with, I think, with similar situations. It was very sophisticated, a full system really. I think a good sailor, and this is something even Maggi is always boasting about, how he knew all the combinations of stars and so on, and he criticizes people and he says, and if you don't know all the combinations of stars, oh, no, you're not going too far.
Yes, comment regarding the wish comment. You can never see a star rising at exactly at the horizon. You can only see a star maybe a few degrees after, because of the layer of the atmosphere.
Yes.
So maybe not exactly in the flight.
That's another factor, yeah, of course.
By the way, so only comment. But I also had a question regarding to the same diagram we are discussing that this is only valid at this given latitude.
Yes, it's another.
It's only for one latitude, the diagram.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and this is one system of navigation that was, and we have a colleague who has written about this in detail, Mayao Pereira. He has explained how these particular systems of navigation were consistent within their areas, within their geographical areas. And well, interestingly, from the point of view of the project where we are now, how the age of exploration precisely in a way was about finding those local traditions, incorporating the know-how, and coming up with a system of navigation that would allow it to go anywhere. But yes, definitely, this is they sailed more or less from the Persian Gulf down to Madagascar, so more or less around this area. And they say in some text, when they're getting a bit too south, now you need to change this and look at this other place, because you will no longer see that star or that other star.
Just a comment also about the places of rising and setting. It was all very experience-based, right? So the places of rising and setting would be according to what you see or you're using to see. And if you know that it's not quite there, you would know how to estimate the difference to put the star in the right place, so to speak.
So, my ignorance about, the Islamic tradition is pachydermic. So I have to make a very simple question. The philosophical, the philosophical, natural philosophical background for this in the Islamic world is identical to the one in the Western world. That is, it is Aristotelian natural philosophy. I'm asking. So, because in the West, what people sometimes don't realize is that these schemes are associated with a very definite sense of perfection, coming from low to high on top. So, in addition to a mathematical ordering, there is a ontological ordering, whereby things that are higher are better. And this is absolutely, second skin in the West. I mean, everybody thinks in this manner. This is why Christianity puts hell bottom and everything up. But the arguments of perfection are many times used by astronomers.
Yes.
So you interpret certain behavior because the planet or the star, whatever, is higher, and therefore it will behave in a more perfect manner. Yes. So you have this also in the Arabic world.
Yes, and the very interesting thing is that, and I think this is why, when speaking of this kind of scientific doctrines, in the Middle Ages, the term Abrahamic is handy.
Okay.
So people don't like that. But it really is handy, because for some divine reason probably, the cosmologies in informing the three revelations are very similar. And so you do have, this is within the discourse of the three religions, of course, Islam came later and it acknowledged and said, yes, we're family. But the previous, now the Christians also, they took the Hebrew Bible. So it's as if each newcomer within this family of three religions, they say, pretty much the same. That's why they fight each other so much, like family. So, and I think this familiar, cosmological, theological, really, allied to the shared Greek heritage, allowed for this. You see, a medieval view of the world that was very, very concordant. There were few things, I think, where sometimes, as it happens here, you have, for instance, that sphere at the end. It says, it's a divine chair, the divine throne, because in the Quran, God is on a throne. And you would call it somewhat different in the Christian tradition because he was not on a throne. But these theological equivalences are there, and as you say, basic things like this reference to the high. I think some people even extend this a bit into the Indo-European family, more extended. So there are some people I know who try to incorporate some elements of Hindu cosmology, which is very developed, and put things in relation, but it's a different world.
Yeah, well, just make a final remark, a general remark. This is why, the ancient world, this world, sometimes there's a misapprehension. It is very mathematical. It is very mathematical if you are learned, the mathematical. But at the same time, you have this very metaphysical ordering of value. You have a very clear hierarchy. And in the modern description of the cosmos, it is what is common. It is also very mathematical, but you took away the hierarchy.
Yes.
And so the observation of the cosmos does not give you any indication to the ordering of your life.
Yes.
And this created enormous dissonance, because for ancient people, not only rationally it was mathematics there, but in a sense it cohered with your ethics.
Yes.
But now and then it's over. You have no ordering, so you just don't know. I can look at the sky. What shall I do tomorrow? I don't know.
Yes.
It's super dramatic.
Yes.
Pascal, Pascal, the horrible, this. Not only Paris, but when they said, what's the expression? Everybody knows this. How the frightening and horrible contemplation of the void space. So this is typical 70s. Now it's a void space which provides no information to me. It's,
It is very, just commenting on your comments, it's very also interesting because I am really impressed by all the circles here. So it seems like if the ancient cosmology was always spherical.
circle.
And the human being needs to be in the center of the circle.
Yeah.
But also it needs to be outside, so we can be in heaven. In this diagram, we are in heaven if we are outside, above.
But we cannot be there.
Sorry?
We cannot be there. We are always in the center, which is the bottom.
No. But if we want to be in heaven,
Okay.
we need to be like a kind of outsider.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
So we are at the same time in the center and also above or
Yeah.
outside the center.
Absolutely.
So it's like a
It-
holistic comprehension.
This, this is God's point of view. So there were, in Portugal, there was a super famous painter, Antonio Holanda, who painted some paintings, putting himself, 16th century, putting himself on the point of view of God.
Outside.
So he tried to paint the universe if he could be on the point of view of God, which is super creative.
And you have Bosch, when you close the panels,
Yeah.
you have God on the outside looking into creation.
So some artists put themselves the question: what do I see if I'm there? What do I see if I'm there? Because everything we know is what we see from here, right? But if I'm on heaven, what is the point of view of God? Yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah, very interesting. Okay.
great.
Thank you so much.
No, I think it's not. Thank you.